Okay, are muted.
Good.
Miss
All right.
everyone.
Let's call the meeting to order. We'll start with the pledge. Where is it?
No flag.
Left flag. Well, anyway, pretend the flag is by the door. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, welcome everybody. Starting half an hour early because we were gonna do a full workshop on the budget, or not budget proposal, but the capital projects and what we could do and don't want to do. And we thought we would be better if we took well, I don't want to say a small chunk, but one specific item which we really need to make some decisions on. Make sure that everybody understands what we're talking about when it comes to energy performance contracts. We haven't, well, we sort of went through one that got shot down years ago. So anyway, we're going to start with the workshop. Oops, no, we're not going to start with the workshop. Caroline is telling me what to do again. Yeah. Okay, do we have a motion to appoint Dr. Watkins as the clerk pro tem for this meeting?
I'll make the motion.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Any against? Okay. Thank you, Amy. All right, so I sent this spreadsheet to y'all. So you could take a look at the comparison between the options. This is really for the HVAC. It's not the elevators and all of that stuff that we were talking about. It's what are we gonna do with the heat, ventilating and air conditioning in these buildings?
And I think that it's important to note that there's sort of a strategy behind this, that we can't really assign value to any of the three propositions until we fully understand what the HVAC looks like, the type of HVAC replacement that we're going to be doing. And once we have that information, then Lauren and Matt, who are both on the call here, can really dig in and find out what the sort of more final EPC or energy performance contract will look like. Because it varies depending on what sort of HVAC project we're going to be doing. So if it's okay, the two documents that were shared with the board, the first one is from Fred and folks at BBS. And that one sort of explains what the options are in terms of the leftmost column is the in-kind replacement. So basically taking what we have and putting it, replacing it with a newer version of exactly what we have. And then we have the option of converting Elm and Alden from steam to hot water. And then we also have the DOAS system, which they have mentioned multiple times. And that's priced out for Alden, Elm, and the middle school. And that's the dedicated outdoor air system. And I know that in the past, Lauren has shared some of the benefits of that type of system. And then we also have on the far right, the geothermal heating and cooling system. The second document is sort of a projection of what our friends at Train believe would be the cost savings over time, sort of what new bill for utilities would look like if we were to do the kind of replacement that's listed there. So Fred, is it okay if we start with you to just
I
run through
I
that?
don't think I sent that second one out. I always
Okay, I
sent
can send that right
the first one. Sorry about that.
now. Okay.
I don't think I saw that one either.
Fred, can I ask you to just start with the explanation of what you've shared with us?
Correct. So the first column really talks about upgrading what you had really in kind. And a lot of these items, in fact, almost all these items were taken out of the building condition survey report, which we had presented to you several months back. And that's really kind of repairing and upgrading what you have in order to provide proper fresh air and ventilation. So For instance, at Alden, provide ventilation in pipe tunnels. We had issues down there with steam creating condensation. We had issues with water coming into the foundation. So we wanted to provide ventilation in there in order to get that out. It's part of the mold problem that you've had in that building. Repair steam leaks, obviously. Dehumidification in the 92 classrooms, because again, you've had issues there with mold as well. Provide air conditioning in all classrooms. And this was something that was kind of mandated, I think, as we did the BCS, that the district really wanted to provide air conditioning in the classrooms via either unit vents or ductless splits or a DOAS or something like that, trying to get away from window AC units. Provide air conditioning for the main office via VRF, and VRF is the latest technology, variable refrigerant flow, and it allows us to do a much better job of dehumidifying as well. Heating system isolation valves, electric service, because we're air conditioning the building now, we're going to need more power. And possible boiler replacement, and that we'll talk about that a little bit. That could either end up in the bond or the energy performance contract, depending upon which way we go with the steam to hot water conversion. So it's pretty much the same at the other buildings, same type of a concept. If you go to the second page, again, the first column is the same. It'll show you the middle school. Again, providing air conditioning in all the classrooms, district-wide, here via VRF ductless splits. So this is a little bit different, that you're going to have a unit vent bringing in outside air. At the same time, you have a unit inside the space, a ductless split, that's trying to cool and dehumidify the space. It's not optimal. It's not what you would design in a brand new building, but it does work. So that's what's proposed there, provide air conditioning for the auditorium. So you could see the grand total of that column number one is about $9.3 million. Again, take what you have, repair it, make it work again. So Elliot wanted us to talk about pros and cons of each one of these options. So the pros are first cost. This is the least expensive option out of the four. So the cons is that you're relying on the existing steam piping, which is 50 to 60 years old in your building. So we're going to continue to use that. So we would certainly recommend that you put some sort of a yearly allowance in your capital line item, your facilities budget, because you are going to need to maintain that steam piping. So you might have to spend $10,000 or $15,000 a year to repair steam leaks or replace bad traps. The second con, as I mentioned before, is that we're bringing in fresh air with one unit while we're trying to cool and dehumidify the space with another one. Not ideal, but it does work. And the third con is more noise than a DOAS unit, which is a rooftop unit. We'll talk about that in a couple more options. So that's column one. Column two is steam to hot water conversion. And this is as a result of a proposal as part of the EPC, where Trane wants to replace your boilers at Alden and Elm with hot water boilers. And the reason they want to do that is hot water boilers are much more efficient. We can do condensing type boilers and really increase the efficiency of your boiler plant. Unfortunately, they can't afford to work in replacement of all of the piping and all of the units in the building, which would have to be done as part of that type of conversion. So that would have to fall as part of a bond referendum if we go in that direction. So this is basically, and the scope is exactly the same for both buildings. It basically is saying you have to rip out all the steam piping. You have to run all new hot water piping. All of the units, all the unit vents, the cabinet heaters, the HMV units, air handlers, all of that are all going to have to be pulled out because they're all designed for steam, and we have to replace them with hot water units. We have to redo all of the controls. We're going to have to redo all of the electrical power wiring. We'll do some ceiling and lighting work because we might end up running some of this piping in the hung ceiling. So we might have to pull either hallway or classroom ceilings out in order to make that happen. We'll completely repipe the building. Asbestos abatement, because we are going to run into some of that on some of that piping above the ceilings. Electrical service upgrade for the additional load due to the air conditioning. And then provide VRF air conditioning for all new unit vents and all new units through the building. So again, if you jump to page 2, you can see the pros and cons of each one of those options. So the pros, you get all new piping and equipment. That's great. You're back in a 50-year life cycle with that. all new temperature controls. So now we're full DDC in the building. We don't have to rely on pneumatic controls anymore. And you get air conditioning through the unit vents. So one unit is now bringing in fresh air and providing air conditioning as well. So the cons, first cost, you can see the cost, the 15.375 million. So it's more money than the option one, the first column. And this only covers the two STEAM buildings. This does not cover the middle school at all. So it's 15 million, a little over 15 million just for the two buildings to do the steam to hot water conversion.
Hey Fred, quick question on option two. If you added the middle school, it would add roughly a couple $1 million to do air conditioning throughout all classrooms?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, that's another option, but
Mhm.
So that's going to be ductless splits. So again, you're going to have a split unit in each classroom. So it's a pretty cost-effective way to do it. But again, you're bringing in fresh air through the unit vent, air conditioning through the ductless split.
okay, yeah, I wouldn't want to, I mean, personally, I wouldn't want to do 3 out of the 4 schools and just leave middle school with nothing, but do we know, I know this is kind of a tricky question, do we know what the baseline cost is with what we already projected for these items? Is it option one or is it lower than option one?
So it's kind of a mix in the base. We had some money in there for DOAS in one of the buildings. We had some money in there for replacement in kind in one of the buildings. And then I don't believe we had anything in for Alden. So it's kind of a mix. It's more money than column one that we're reflecting here. So if you go with column one, you'd actually be reducing the amount of money in the proposed bond referendum in the HVAC line item at this point.
But we don't know approximately how much that was, just so we can kind of compare as we move through it.
I do not have that in front
That's
of me
fine.
right now.
I have Lou's sheet I can pull up in a second. And I think part of the reason we were having this conversation today, Chris, to your point is, the HVAC numbers have been fluctuating as we've gone back and forth with scope options. So being the largest cost driver so far in our overall scope projections, we wanted to kind of nail this one down and build off from it. The board has expressed overall cost concerns on the project budget. So, establishing whether we're going with 15 million in HVAC work or 40 million in HVAC work, is going to really lead us down the road of the overall project scope budget, if that makes sense.
No, it makes sense. I just want to know if the first column 1 and 2 are a wash and then 3 and 4 adds 10 or 20 or $30 million to the budget, because that can make a huge difference.
Yeah, I'll let Lou speak to that. I know in his early charts, we had DOAS in the cost estimate for Alden. For Elm, I think we may have had it for Alden. I'm just pulling up the document. We did not propose it for the middle school. I'm sorry.
I don't want to throw this whole conversation off. I was just curious because obviously it's going to make a difference as we move forward, because we all want the best, but at the same point, is that going to add 20 or $30 million towards $65 million budget? That's the concern.
But can you just quick and simple? This falls, all of this would fall on, no matter which option we chose, would fall under the EPC, right?
No, there would be components of it, and Matt and Lauren are gonna talk about those pieces
Okay.
after Fred explains. the
Can you
motion.
describe the difference of having the EPC versus just having a capital budget for this stuff?
So what I'll touch on that really quick. So these options right here are all talking about capital costs. The biggest thing is the EPC is determining if we're going to do a steam boiler replacement, which isn't going to generate as much savings. So the EPC isn't going to be as large, or if we're going to do a hot water to steam replacement. That would pay for itself, that piece of that project. So everything in the boiler plant in that case would pay for itself, and it wouldn't be in the bond referendum. But what Fred was trying to say for option 2, the capital cost has to carry, when you do a conversion, you have to replace all the piping and all the end devices off of that system. So that would be the capital cost that he's showing in that option 2.
And I'm assuming that if you go up to the DOAS, you're going to get more EPC, right? So,
Yeah,
I mean,
so we'll touch on some of those numbers too. So the more and I don't know if you did this intentionally, Fred, the different options, the more Obviously, the hot water to the steam to hot water conversion is very high efficiency. As we keep going to the right, honestly, like the most expensive one is obviously the most efficient. And you'll see that, and Matt can speak to that in the numbers. But the actual cost of the installation of these things depends on how much savings we generate. But what Matt will touch on is your annual savings that you'll get from each option of the capital project.
Okay.
Okay.
So column 3 is the DOAS units, which we've talked about.
Hang on, Fred.
Oh,
Before
sorry.
you go forward, for 2, 3, and 4, what do you do with what are we doing with the steam tunnels if they're no longer in use?
Doing with the AC in those scenarios?
You're going to remove and take out, what happens to the actual tunnel? That
Do you
exists
seal it
currently?
up? Do you fill it in? Do you know?
So in option 2, under steam to hot water conversion, there is no air conditioning. Well, there is on both Alden, it says provide VRF AC for all new units and unit vents. Because you're replacing all the units, all of those units will have built-in air conditioning in them. So in option 2, it's fully air conditioned. Option 1, it's fully air conditioned with a combination of unit vents and ductless splits.
Right, but if we go for the 2, 3, and 4, as we go, we get 1, let's put 1 out of the picture. What the actual existing steam tunnel, that it will not be being used anymore, what happens to it?
They just get used for utility spaces. There are things down there other than steam piping. There's hot water piping down there, cold water piping, things like that. They would remain as a maintenance tunnel for those.
Okay, thank you.
So with the DOAS, the third column, that would be at Alden, Elm, and the middle school. So all 3 buildings, and the scope is the same at all 3. So basically what we'd be doing is putting rooftop units in to act as dedicated outdoor air systems. So they would bring in the code amount of outdoor air, they would dehumidify it, they would heat it or cool it, depending upon the season that we were in. We would then replace, so in order to do that, we have to run a lot of ductwork. It's going to be very intrusive. We're going to have to remove a lot of ceilings in order to make that work, or create a lot of penetrations in your roof. You have to do asbestos abatement, roof work, power wiring for the air conditioning. You will get all new controls as part of that. We'll have to do some structural work to install those units, and it's going to be, I think we proposed 3 or 4 new DOAS units. Ductless split heat pumps in each space. So the DOAS units bring in the fresh air, but they temper it, they heat it, they cool it, they dehumidify it. So those ductless splits are really just taking the space from neutral air temperature up to whatever temperature or down to whatever temperature you want to get it to. So it's a much more efficient type system. We would leave the unit vents there, and we would tie them into the DDC, and all they would be doing is providing supplemental heat, because heat pumps are not as effective at lower temperatures outside. So you would want to leave your heating system in place in order to supplement that and do the heavy lifting on that. So you can see the estimated costs when you get down to the second page. It's almost $32 million to do it at those 3 buildings. The pros, and if we were to design a new building for you, knock a building down, design a new building, this is the strategy we would use. Not leaving the unit vents in there, but we would do DOAS along with heat pumps and some supplemental heat. So it's much quieter way to do it. It's much more efficient. There would be energy recovery on those rooftop units. So you're recovering energy and make them more efficient. You'd get all new temperature controls. The cons: first, cost. The second one is rooftop ductwork penetration. So we're going to be running a lot of ductwork. So we're either going to be running it on the roof and punching holes in your roof to come down, or we're going to be running it inside the building and then doing a lot of ceiling and lighting work. And as a result, it's very intrusive as far as construction work. So we might have to talk about doing one wing at a time, or somehow phasing this in order to make it work well, so that we don't have to take you out of operation for a prolonged period of time.
But Fred, part of the EPC is to also do the, I mean, I know it's not what we're talking about tonight, but is to do the lighting, you know, switch over to LEDs. Does that, I mean, how intrusive is that work and is it all at the same time? Like, do we, like in this room, would we rip out all the lights that are in here and put the ductwork in at the same time?
Right, so that's a good question. So what we would try and do is coordinate it with Train so that even if we can't coordinate the timeline with them, we might have them provide the light fixtures to us. So that when we do the ceiling work, we're able to use their efficient light fixtures and put them in so that we get the savings as part of the EPC.
Right, so I mean, even the way the EP, and again, please forgive me if I'm like completely talking nonsense. But part of the EPC is we list out all this stuff that's gonna save us a bunch of energy and specifically the cost.
Right.
Balance that against the price of doing it and then figure out how long before it pays for itself, right?
Correct.
Matt, do you want to elaborate a little bit with like the lighting and the 18-year payback, just briefly?
Yeah, so as Fred said, we typically in spaces that are going to be overlapped with capital improvements, most often we'll provide the fixtures and then we'll allow the capital project to install when the ceiling work is ready. And so we're able to, because we're providing that energy efficient fixture, we're able to do a couple of things. One, we can guarantee the energy savings for it and provide you the fixture for free. It's not a burden on your capital project. And then two, we can also recover rebates on your behalf from the local utility that will also help your financials.
And one last question for you, Fred. On the fourth option, it specifically talks about removal of existing heating system, remove and replace. But I don't see remove in these other ones. Are we just, well, I guess there's one in all of it, but are we primarily just leaving the stuff? You know, the old piping and that? And
No, basically, in order to implement geothermal, we have to take out all of the equipment that you have, and we have to replace it all with water source heat pumps fed off of the geothermal well. So everything is going to be ripped out. Everything is going to be brand new. The whole building is going to be repiped. All new controls, all new electric, all new everything. So it's basically getting a brand new system. One of the big differences, though, is that we have to install a geothermal well field. And that is millions of dollars worth of work in order to be able to do that. And Train did some modeling on that as far as the energy savings, and I think they're going to share that in a little while. It is by far the most efficient system. You know, in the pros and cons, it's renewable and it's energy efficient. You get all new piping equipment, all new temperature controls. It's a great system. Obviously, you could see the cost there, 47 million. If you were trying to stick to a $60 million bond, that's kind of a big hurt. So we would have to talk about that. Increased maintenance costs and intrusive construction work. So again, same thing, because we're ripping everything out, we might have to phase this somehow in order to not completely disrupt your buildings all at one time.
Is it possible to get a basic payback on this? Based just on the numbers in the spreadsheet? It's hard to go through them because it's an image. So I can only see one set of numbers at a time, but it looks like there's enough information there to calculate a basic payback on each of these to say, you know, if we do the in-kind replacement, it's going to pay back in 8. If we do the next one, it's going to pay back in whatever. Can we at least get that? For me, it's almost impossible to pick a number without knowing the payback.
So Matt, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, so the payback is pretty easy to calculate. These are pretty big capital intensive projects though, so the paybacks are really long. When you look at the overall infrastructure upgrade, the payback is long. I can put together the paybacks on a per item basis.
That's my point. If the paybacks extend beyond 18 years, then it's straight into the capital budget, not part of an EPC, correct?
Correct. So anything beyond the 18-year would be part of the capital.
That's exactly where I want to see those numbers.
So yeah, one thing I just want to clarify too, Fred's spreadsheet touches on a lot of mostly capital work. So our EPC numbers are still around the same, right, Matt? Around 5-6 million, because we were already calculating, hopefully, to do a steam to hot water conversion at Alden and Elm, lighting, majority is lighting, building envelope and building automation, temperature controls. So we can take on some of those costs from these larger numbers. But majority of the numbers Fred's sharing is capital costs. Does that make sense? Okay,
That's what I need.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure. Okay, go ahead, Matt, sorry.
So there's a couple of items, and I'm not sure you can see the existing energy cost per building, and then the proposed for each option, and then, you know, rolls up for each option where it would end up. But there's a few holes in those numbers. So it's based on your baseline. So when we do the new system, you're going to add some AC. That's going to impact your future energy costs. The more efficient system you add in, the better off it is. So when you get all the way down to the Geo system, you're operating at about a third of your existing cost. I would say you probably got to add in, you know, 10 or 15% for some of the adjustments of, hey, we're going to add some cooling where we didn't have it before, and we're going to add some ventilation that maybe we were under ventilated on before. But all these projections of energy costs are compared to the baseline operation, assuming that everything's ventilated correctly. And you know, there shouldn't be a huge cooling penalty because most of these buildings have a pretty fair amount of window AC units that are everywhere, and split systems that are not going to operate nearly as efficient as the new systems that'll be installed. So it's a little bit misleading to go all the way down to the Geo and operate at a third of your existing energy costs, but it's really not far off. It's really a projection based on, you know, your baseline that we know now and we understand. So these things, the options, it clearly shows that you go from good, better, best, most best. And so one thing that you should consider with the Geo is there is an investment tax credit that's available now. And that kind of muddies the waters a little bit. We're fumbling around with that for some of our other customers. That's a rebate that comes back to the district after the fact. And I'm not quite sure how to navigate that. We're working on a few other projects looking at that. But the Geo project could be eligible for 30 to 40% of that cost back in an investment tax credit. And so it's a pretty big deal. Geo in the past is a beautiful thing, but it's always been, you know, the first cost is very high and it's hard to make it work. People have to be very passionate around it. I'm liking it more for customers like you who have oil. You know, it really makes a lot more sense when you're looking at it compared to oil.
Matt, do you want to walk through I don't know if they're seeing the sheet that you modified with the baseline versus what each option Fred gave and the energy per square foot?
Yeah.
Can we walk through just the difference of, you know, how their buildings perform in each option and kind of explain what that means, I guess, like for their future utility? We can't predict how much, but I know you kind of touched on that, but I don't know if you guys are looking at in the room or looking at the form that Matt sent through, or are you guys looking at that right now?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
But it's an image embedded in an email, so I think some are having difficulty scrolling back and forth to compare them.
Okay. So Matt, do you want to just go through each of these options in the school and kind of, I know you said good, better, best, very best, right? But kind of just go through, you know, maybe the first couple and how we're seeing them perform at energy standpoint?
Yeah, so I'll start with Alden. And so, you look at your existing energy costs, operating costs are about 117,000. And that doesn't factor in, your maintenance costs for those old dilapidated systems that have major failures and John has to go over and manually turn a boiler on and shut it off. It doesn't factor in those other costs. It's purely energy in those figures. And so you're operating at $2.83 a square foot for Alden in its current form. As I stated the last time, that's like more than some of our hospitals operate at. I mean, just unbelievable. So when you look at energy, we look at BTUs per square foot. For a building like yours, and you guys had a benchmarking report that was subsidized by NYSERDA, a building like Alden should operate around 35,000 BTUs per square foot. And you're operating it that's an average building compared to your peers. You're operating at 97,000 BTUs per square foot because of the steam systems, because of the poor insulation, because of the poor controls and all of those things. So when we looked at option A, we would do improvements to the steam system, replace traps, maybe install a more efficient steam boiler, and we would drop your operating costs from $2.83 a square foot down to $2.12 a square foot. And you would end up at about 73,000 BTUs per square foot, which is a pretty good improvement over where you were. But it still is not good as comparative to peer buildings and other districts. And it's mainly because you have a steam system and it's just really not as efficient. So staying with Alden, when we go over to a hot water system, we're getting down to reducing the energy by about 40% by going to hot water. And it's, the energy impact of really taking that superheated water down to just hot water, being able to reset and provide hot water to heat the building a lot of times around 100, 120 degrees as opposed to, superheated steam and all that heat loss that's associated with that through the steam tunnels and everything. So you drop from $2.83 per square foot all the way down to $1.27 a square foot, which is amazing. It's great. And then you get to 43,000 BTUs per square foot. Now you're starting to get close to rival some of your peer buildings, but you still have oil. You still have some other deficiencies just being a standard 80% hot water system, or 80 plus 85%. So when you go over to the DOAS, and we're able to better condition the fresh air, better control how it's brought into the space, and more efficiently heat and condition that air, it saves a few more percent. And so you get from your 283 down to about $1.13 a square foot. And now you're really rivaling the peer buildings at, closer to the 35,000, it's 38,000 BTUs per square foot in this projection, which would need some fine tuning depending on, the final equipment selections and everything. So getting all the way to the end where we're doing geothermal, this geothermal system pretty confidently eliminates your entire oil bill. There would be little or no need. There would really be no need for you to use any oil in the future. I'm not a big fan of not having a safety net. So I would maybe encourage the system to have some supplemental heat in case you had a ground well issue or a saturation issue. But really, for all practical purposes, the geo system eliminates oil altogether.
Except
And-
for the high school.
right,
We're not teaching about the high school.
right.
High school.
We still run on oil. with high
Right,
school.
I mean, I don't want anybody in the public thinking, oh, they're gonna get off oil, because we're still gonna have the high school.
And which of these are we, I know the high school isn't in here, is the, if I'm thinking, well, what does this high school look like? Descriptively. Is it number one or is it subpar number one? Options, I'm calling number one. The,
But we don't have steam in the high
No.
school.
It's not quite three, but it's
Yeah.
a different system.
Yeah, it's, I
okay,
mean, because it's air conditioned, it's,
right,
you know, so
more like number
it's
two,
probably 2.5,
two and a half,
somewhere
okay,
between
Not
two and three.
steam,
Okay.
it's more towards the.
okay.
And I know you, I think you just said you don't know, but this tax break, is this like the state giving us money to do this? Or this is the state basically giving us some kind of I don't know where the tax would come in.
It's from the federal government. Matt, you can talk more about it, but it's the Inflation Reduction Act and tax incentives that they're putting out there to improve, energy efficiency. But Matt, you can elaborate more on that if you want. The state
Yes.
also incentivizes these type of systems largely right now as well, but the one that he's speaking of is the federal government.
Yep, so it would be eligible for clean heat incentives through your local utility. They subsidize clean heat incentives. It's a pretty rudimentary number that I throw out there that's usually very safe, is about $1,000 per ton. So when you look at the capacity of a heat pump, ends up being, for example, Alden, maybe we're looking at, they could get clean heat incentives for about $100,000 or something like that from the local utility. And then when you, the investment tax credit, it's a little bit strange because you're a non-taxable entity, but the Inflation Reduction Act changed it so that not-for-profit and non-taxable entities can actually apply for a tax credit to do clean and green type projects. And it depends on the efficiency level of the project and then some other demographic items. And so most of these projects we're seeing, the tax credit comes back to the district after the project is installed. So that's the logistical challenge with this, is that those funds come back after it's installed. And, for you folks, you have to go out to referendum ahead of that and pay for it and then get a rebate back. And it's a travesty that that's the case, because it's a serious amount of money that would come back, and it makes a lot of sense, be 30 to 40%.
I mean, if we could get off oil and get a serious chunk of money back, reduce our electrical use by, changing over to light fixtures. But
You're going out of the $100 million.
right,
Yeah.
all right,
So, Train is working on kind of the choreograph of how to put together one of these projects, but we're still trying to figure out how to do it exactly for a school where you would have to borrow money up front, get approval from your constituents, and then get a rebate back. And it's not that easy, especially with low building aid.
and then what do we do with that, I mean, it's a stupid question, but what do we do with the money once it comes back? Because you can't just, start spending it Like,
You could use the revenue to offset the bond debt. And that's what we would talk to our bond counsel and our financial advisors about the timing of that revenue coming back. I mean, at any point in time, the district can allocate cash towards our bonded debt. So right now we have a capital reserve of about $8.8 million. We may add to it. But at any time, if we end up borrowing 20 or 30 or $40 million from the community and we find ourselves in another surplus situation, we can allocate $1 million of fund balance 3-4 years from now towards paying back that debt. We can do the same with the revenue. We just got to figure out the legal machinations of how it works, to Matt's point.
okay,
And obviously for the geo, there's some other analysis that would have to be done. You know, we have to do there'd have to be some test wells and make sure that the geological resource was good and that we could get the depth and all that stuff. But
Mhm.
And you weren't here for this, but to your point that you made a couple weeks ago or a month ago, Dan, I think we kind of need as a board to kind of figure out kind of our max budgeted amount, whether that's 40, 50, 60 million dollars. Just because, looking at the tax figures and how much it's going to increase. And then we can kind of back into it if we say, okay, we're going to go with option 3 and that's X amount. But now we got to find $10 million to remove off of our original plan. And that really is how you're going to shrink it into where it's manageable. I mean, right now it's hard to say, if we're starting at 60 and we're scaling up, okay, option 1 is a wash. Option 2 is an extra 6 million and then, extra 20 million and extra 40 million.
But even that's hard to say because the
Right,
way
it's
I'm
gonna
reading it, it
increase.
looks like Alden is replacement in kind and Elm is DOAS and the middle school's nothing right now.
I think there was 9 million, was it 9.7, I think was originally on the original sheet.
And I'm not sure. I'm going by these. I see Alden just as BCS new boiler. And Elm said DOAS. So I'm trying to, it feels like a little bit of a guess. It's just-
Well, and again, I
There's
mean,
no
from what
change.
they had said before too, the option, as you go higher, you're gonna get more back,
Yeah.
right? So I mean, it might not be a big percentage, but that's kind of where what we need to know as a board is, okay, well, how much really bottom line is each one of these within 10 or 15% hit the bottom line?
Then how would you put it up those propositions? Because the worst thing the board would want to do is to put up the HVAC, say you went with the Geo one, and then all of a sudden that passed and the proposition with the windows failed, then we'd be throwing the money right outside. And
Well, Geo would be after the windows though. They have to vote for windows before they got the Geo. I mean, I would think.
Well, yes, but I'm saying if we'd have to combine things somehow.
Yes.
If there was separate in theory, I'm just saying in theory, they could go down. You could pass this great HVAC and your windows could fail and we're stuck with single pane.
And how does it work? I remember the discussion that if anything was on the building condition survey that we didn't address, that went to bond, we can't use emergency funds later on.
Right.
Yeah.
So if we opt to replace something on the building condition survey, a boiler, with 5x the cost for Geo, and that gets voted down, does that mean we then cannot use emergency funds for the boiler because we tried to replace with Geo and it didn't go through?
If I could jump in here for a second, I think we're getting a little bit deep into the detail. I would say that in terms of structuring the bond resolution, we would work with counsel on the verbiage. Typically, the verbiage is a little bit general. The commitment to scope design is what we would share with the community on the front end. And Joe or Brian or any of the BBS guys can speak to this, I'm sure, in their experience. But we would want to be very careful how we structure this. So we could theoretically structure the props 1, 2, and 3 to scale up the budgets for these projects as proposed. So we could say, if the board was looking to do so, we could say that prop 1 would be an in-kind replacement. Prop 2 would be additional funds for a DOAS upgrade. Prop 3 could be further additional funds for a full geothermal. And so that the scope evolves as the budget evolves. But one isn't, a later prop isn't contingent on an earlier prop in a way that doesn't make sense for us. We would structure it in a way that each one builds upon. So that, to Howard's point, we don't approve the Cadillac system and we don't have our windows approved. We will want the windows in prop 1 with the baseline HVAC, and then either prop 2 or 3 subsequent to that would increase the budget to improve or expand upon that scope of work without overriding or being inhibited by another component that wasn't approved. Does that make sense, Joe? Thank you.
I think there's a danger in structuring it that way, even though I recognize that we can, because I think we need to really be clear on what is the best and most efficient way to heat and cool buildings. And I think if we make an option, an in-kind replacement, and that seems good enough for Prop 1, there may be people who are uninformed who look at that and say, well, then it's good enough, let's just do this. And there's a lot of problems with doing that, which we already know. We're replacing, I think, Matt, you had explained that this system, was outdated many years ago. So we would just be basically putting a Band-Aid on a system that's really not working efficiently. And we still would be looking at the utility costs that are, astronomical in comparison to similar buildings.
Well, the other thing is we're trying to focus, at least in my opinion, we need to focus on the future. It's not just, the windows suck and there's no backup boiler in Alden. So let's go fix those two things, because as the climate changes, we're gonna get more and more humidity, more and more heat. We got these kids coming into summer school. We need to try to focus on getting this, within the appetite of the taxpayer, but getting something that's gonna last for, another 20 years, 30 years versus something that, this came up, and this was really before, I'm not sure, I don't think you were even on the board yet, Howard. This came up once before an energy performance contract, and the idea was to put a backup boiler, same thing in Alden. And it got thrown out. I mean, we voted it down, or not voted it down, just told them to take.
I was in the
it away.
audience when that went, yeah.
Because it's ridiculous
before I got on.
to take garbage technology that's 50 some odd years old and try to replace it in kind. Can you imagine we spend whatever the number one option is, money, and it's still loud as hell, it's still hot as hell, it's still, Elm Drive is a skating rink with the water on the floor from the humidity. I mean, people are gonna think we're just throwing money, good money after bad money on these buildings.
If we narrowed it down to two options, how easy would it be to get a real live look at the estimates of what it would be?
Which estimates are you looking for, Chris, specifically?
Just the total number we have to go to the public to get.
I mean, I think, and I totally agree with Perry and Caroline's statements. I spoke to what's feasible, what's possible, but certainly not what's best for our community. I think today we're looking for the board to give us some prioritization of concept in terms of what's most important to us as an organization, and I think those pros and cons at the bottom are really telling. If we replace in kind, we're looking at still making repairs, still budgeting for oil consumption, still budgeting for fixing 50-year-old infrastructure issues within that system. We're asking the board if old tech is good enough to fix, or if we're forward thinking in that a DOAS is going to be quieter, more environmentally friendly for our internal air quality, or if we want to be state of the art. And then I think we build the rest of the scope around that. So I guess to answer your question, Chris, if you give us kind of a conceptual direction, we can work with Lou and his team to really tighten up the rest of it. I think the next deep dive we have to do is going to be the structural component and the architectural component of the middle school, because that's another one that was kind of a varied scope discussion. And we kind of wanted to address this one being the most impactful to environmental health and safety, and then have a similar conversation about the architectural and the structural components of the middle school, and then the academic program components of the middle school and high school, because all of these things are varied in terms of what they could be. So I guess that's kind of my question to the board is what's most important to the board as an organization in terms of when we pick this scope and why?
So you guys asked before about what type of dollars were in the Prop 1, 2, and 3. So I just pulled out my presentation from last time, and it looks like Prop 1 has about a little over $8 million, 8.35 million. The majority of that is at Elm. Prop 2 has 11.5 million, and that is all at the middle school. So we have about 19.85, almost $20 million between Prop 1 and Prop 2 as part of the previous bond presentation.
And Fred, what systems were those inclusive of?
Yeah. Differential.
Fred,
So the middle school was for replacement in kind of equipment. And Elm was, I believe, a DOAS system. There was nothing in there for Alden, though, however, so that building is not included as of right now in Prop 1 or Prop 2.
Yeah,
And there's
and
nothing
just so,
in Prop 3.
yeah, Fred, just for Alden, what I did do was put in money in there for full HVAC upgrades for the program renovations. So the spaces that we were touching and bringing up to date, they were getting full HVAC upgrades. But you're correct. Throughout the rest of the building, we really weren't. Yeah, we weren't touching those. Yep.
So Prop 1 initially was basically the first option we have here, because it's the same amount of money. No? You said it was 8.3, and this is 9.2. Or did it, or
It was split up differently.
It was split up to, it didn't include Alden, right?
No, he said that we were
Now,
about.
that was just for, it was 7.85 million for Elm and 500,000 for Alden. So it was just those two buildings that were in Prop 1, and it was really DOAS at Elm and then some boiler replacement at Alden. Those are the only two items in Prop 1. So
okay, I only asked because that was 8.3 and Prop 1 now, well, option 1 now is 9.2, including all of Alden, all of Elm.
So
Right,
you're.
but that's all three. That's all three buildings. Prop 1 only had one building HVAC wise, which was Elm.
Your Proposition 1, you only have basically one building, some improvements. Proposition 2, how many buildings were involved in it?
One, it was the middle school, and that was replacement in kind, right?
So now it's Elm, Alden, Elm and middle school. And then Proposition 3,
Had no HVAC work in it.
we felt it was too important to leave it to the third.
yeah, but then we had we're still missing one of the buildings, right?
Yeah,
Because this
Alden
was,
did not have substantial HVAC work as part of Prop 1 or 2.
it was only to put the backup boiler in.
Right, and again, what we didn't want to do was come back with another version of that proposition sheet without having this discussion to really nail down what this scope needs to look like. So that's kind of why we're coming back to that whole, what's the most important parts of this to the board in terms of indoor air quality, health and safety, noise reduction, dependence on utilities, overall cost of maintenance and operation, and that's how this chart was written. And I appreciate the team putting it together, because from left to right, it shows, the cost. The front end cost goes up from left to right, but the operating costs do go down, as well as the maintenance costs and the cost of utility consumption in a very basic sense.
But
So,
ultimately, the costs translate directly to what taxpayers are gonna be paying if they approve this. And I honestly don't think we're bumping up against a conceptual what's best. I think we're bumping up against what's the district voters gonna approve, and I think we're probably
Somewhere.
there, we're past that limit already. So unless we want to make a discussion about what's gonna get cut if we add this, I think we're heading for a no.
I would agree.
can I share my screen?
I don't think there's anybody that disagrees that we want the best system for the school. Don't get us wrong. It's just that it's what's feasible and what we can actually get through with the taxpayers as well.
Right, it's hard to show the voting public what we're showing, what you're showing here, because you don't have the divided attention sitting down like this. To show that these are their buildings, and it's in the best interest to the community to make sure that these buildings plan for the future, as Perry said, and not just repair what was workable in the past. But, as trustees, the board has to take into effect that a lot of people in the community are on fixed budgets. The economy is not great, to say the least, and some people are very much hurting. So we have to try to do the best we can and with a realistic bond to go up.
So just, I think that's a great point. I think the original scope of work was set up to sort of grow into something in the future. I think right now the conversation is equity across all the buildings. Let's try to make sure everything's the same. What we did was we said, Elm, let's do a DOAS system. That's how the prop was set up. Alden, we were renovating and really reconfiguring some of that, a lot of that space. So we were going to get a lot of updated HVAC there anyway. And then there was a boiler upgrade. And then on prop 2, the HVAC system for the middle school was just basically a replacement in kind. So that was the idea. If you want every building to be the same, then yeah, it's going to be a big prop, and it's going to be a big hit. But there is also the approach of saying, okay, let's take care of maybe the elementary schools first now, and let's move on to the middle school at a later time, or it's a replacement in kind.
Well, Lou, like we were saying before, I mean, the second option here, steam to hot water. The only thing you're missing is middle school air conditioners, which units can be put in for a couple $1 million, and you're still looking at, maybe 17 million versus 31 or 47.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not saying that's the best option. I'm just saying that that's kind of how we got to look at it, is if, then we'd be giving air conditioning to all 3 schools, and high school already has it.
But we still, I still don't think we know. If I said option 3, am I saving, and I'm assuming that we're including lighting and whatever else has a major energy effect. I don't think we're seeing this is going to cost $6 million a year in interest and dividends, or interest and payments. You're going to save, I don't know, $200,000 in electrical. You're going to save $1 million in oil, so that we can say, look, we're going to take this thing out for 31. It's going to cost us this much per month, but it's also going to pay us back this amount, or approximately.
But how does that translate to the taxpayer? I know it's the right thing to do.
Well,
But as a taxpayer,
if you
we're telling
commit
them-
that money that you're gonna save is gonna go to the, I mean, if it comes out, it's complete nonsense, and like, we don't save anything,
Yeah.
then we're in trouble. But if the numbers are realistic and say, you're gonna save 12 million or $5 million a year in energy costs, including the lights and all that stuff. And that 5 million is gonna come off of a $7 million bill, then you can say, this is really what it's gonna cost the taxpayers. Not, because it's this, I'm much hoping that we would never just say, here's 31 million. You guys split it up and pay us back, pay us taxpayers. It's more of the savings that we're cutting our other budgets by that get applied to that. Now, it's still money out of the taxpayer, because if we could save that and didn't have to pay it to something.
Well, they wouldn't realize it until we actually did save it and did reduce it, right?
And that would only happen if we didn't increase taxes 2%. That would only, I mean, if you say we save 5 million, that's sort of a 4% savings. Does that mean next year the tax levy is gonna go down 2%?
If we paid it
That's what
back.
I'm saying.
Yeah,
It's
no, I
not gonna
understand.
translate to the
I
tax.
understand.
I
but-
agree that it's gonna benefit the district. It's gonna set us on a better financial trajectory. It's gonna help us stay under the tax cap more easily and still not be underfunding things. I get all that. But it's not directly gonna translate back to the taxpayer And
No, it's taxpayers gonna say, "Oh, taxes went up another 2%
exactly,
this year."
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So if
Um,
we oversell the savings,
understand. Well, and that's where, like, wherever this tax breaks come from,
yeah,
you know, and how that gets fed back into us. And is that real? Or is that gonna be the next time?
Being it's federal, it may, who knows,
Yeah.
if you'll ever see it.
Yeah,
Dave, the numbers you're working off of, I think you were trying to get it down to 50, right? I think roughly with your percentages,
roughly, I was just trying,
but that would include then the 20, the 8 plus the 11, right? That was pretty much the total,
yeah, that was the all three crops.
right? So it's about 19 million of this into all three crops.
Yeah.
Which isn't very far off of option 3, but
I mean, and the,
then maybe 20 million.
the site work,
Mhm.
I mean, I sent you guys that email. You know, suddenly people are saying, wait, what, you're gonna do what over at Elm? You're gonna build a driveway down the side of the building? I don't like that. You know, so those are things that we should be able to. You know, hey, it's not worth investing in, unless it's a safety issue.
Right, and I think unfortunately, we're in a position right now where because of deferred maintenance and other issues, right? We have such an enormous task ahead of us, but we really have to prioritize needs versus wants. And I think that how the buildings breathe is a need. We need to do this right. I mean, it's become more and more important, even more recently in the last couple of years, right? To address these types of things. So I feel like this is one of the probably most important decisions that I think, David, what you said before makes sense. When we look at this, right, then we have to look at possibly what we are not even going out there as an option. And maybe that's where some of the site work that you're talking about, Harry, that is definitely a matter of convenience, right? It is not a matter of safety at this point. So I think we need to have frank discussions about that.
I agree completely. And I think, you know, one of the other pieces that, you know, to Caroline's point, there's intangibles. And I know the board members have been kicking around, like, how do we bring this to the public? But there are intangibles that are not necessarily straight line quantifiable in terms of dollars and cents. I mean, we're talking about, you know, noise levels in classrooms. We're talking about the humidity levels in buildings. You know, we have children with asthma. We have 504s coming in every year, increasing the demand for, you know, improving air quality in our classrooms. You know, the more expensive options here are going to give us better air quality in our classrooms. That's just a fact. And that's something that it's challenging to quantify in terms of dollars or maybe substantiate in dollars, but there is a value add there that I think it's on us to effectively communicate to our constituents if we're going to ask them to support it.
Well, the cost for steam to hot water in the JOAS is the same at Alden and Elm. It's really just figuring out, I mean, if we wanted to go that route, right? Why wouldn't we go with JOAS versus steam to hot water? It's the same cost for Alden and Elm. So maybe we need to figure out what we want to do at the middle school,
Where are you seeing it the same one?
right? 6.8.4
On the first chart.
million. For. And then
Fred.
6.
Yeah.
Fred, for option 3, you mentioned leaving the UVs for supplemental heat. Would we still be doing the conversion for those UVs, or would steam still be left in the building with that option 3 DOAS system?
Option 3 would leave steam in the building.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. Okay.
Why?
Think of that. So that's not moving, that's not changing it to hot water, that's keeping it as steam, but it's a DOAS system.
Yeah, the steam heat would be used for very little of the heating load. Majority of your heating load is going to be happening through your rooftop unit and then through your heat pumps, through your VRF heat pumps. So the steam is really just there on the really cold days when the heat pumps maybe can't quite keep up, so that you can supplement those classrooms and make sure that they're heated properly. So the steam
Wouldn't we
will
still-
drop down, you know.
Wouldn't we still have the maintenance on that if we kept that system? Option 1?
Yes, you will still have the maintenance on the steam system, the boiler, the condensate receivers, traps, all of that.
Yes.
So just a question, just to re-verify. So option 2, if we added in the middle school and we put systems in every classroom, it would be $2 to $4 million, right? Give or take
Yeah, 2.7.
2.7.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not holding you to these numbers. I'm just saying, so. Option 2 with the middle school getting the upgrade as well. What does that bring it to? I'm on the wrong one.
1808, I have 1808 million. We added that.
Right, 15.3 plus the 2.7.
And then,
But that-
then how much more would it be to do asbestos abatement at the middle school? Because I assume that's an additional.
Yeah, of course it is.
The
So
asbestos under which option?
Option 2.
If we added the middle school to option number 2,
Basically doing all the same things in option 3, except it's really just putting the,
right, how much would asbestos abatement for the middle school cost?
I shouldn't say that.
Roughly,
It's not the same as option 3.
no.
I'm not sure I'm following. So you're taking the middle school, the 2.705 million from option 1 and moving that over to option 2 and then adding that to the steam hot water conversions at Alden and Elm? Is that?
Correct. But Alden and Elm mention asbestos abatement, so I'm assuming when we move middle school from option number 1, we have to also, we would want to add in asbestos abatement.
Well,
So I'm wondering-
that's due to the massive amount of work actually at Alden and Elm, and it's much less work to install that air conditioning with the VRF ductless splits at the middle school, right, Fred?
Yeah, you wouldn't need to add asbestos abatement to the middle school if you moved it over.
Okay, so you'd only be on 2.7, so roughly not
Okay.
Yes.
18 million or so. And you wouldn't have steam anymore.
Okay.
And then. The window, so if we said, what was that number? 18?
1808.
18, well, so let's say 19. If we, then we're gonna do the windows,
That breaks even from what we have right now. Right now, we have 19 million in the budget. I know it's over 2 different props, but I'm just saying the total $60 million would stay the same.
well,
Does that make sense?
well, I don't know, I mean, where are the windows for that? And
Well, they're already in here.
they're already.
Everything's in here.
Right, well, what I'm trying to get to is, what do we think that number is? Like, if we said we're gonna do the windows, we're gonna do the lights, we're gonna do the option 2, I guess, on the spreadsheet with the middle school added. What is that number? Is that 50 million? Is that 35 million? Because that's what we have to decide is we think that's.
We're talking without the roundabouts and without the driveways.
Yeah.
Oh,
I mean,
that's
put
a lot more.
that stuff in my opinion, put that stuff in option 3. Because like I said, there's been a couple people complain about it. But there's been now a couple people not, sort of complaining about the complaining part. So if we put that in a later prop, focused on the air, the whatever you want to call it, the
roof lighting,
the roof, but also focus on stuff that directly affects kids, the teachers, the staff. Make this place comfortable, reduce our energy consumption.
They would have to tell you that. I mean, we have just in science classrooms and libraries, I mean, $5 or $6 million right here. I mean, depending on what you're looking to kind of remove. But yes, Prop 1 should be all of that important.
Well, I was actually gonna say is, let's say that we think that number's around 40. I'm just guessing. We think that number's around 40. Do we say, okay, tell us what you can stuff in a $40 million bag? And, we want to focus on conditioning and all that stuff. And then we'll look at the other ones as Proposition 2 and Proposition 3.
So wait, if I'm getting the message clearly, are we saying you want us to just front load all the HVAC, health and safety, indoor air quality stuff to Prop 1, do program in Prop 2, and then infrastructure site work in Prop 3?
I'm not saying that. What I'm trying to do is, we're looking at, right now, we're looking at the energy stuff, right? The
Right.
heating, HVAC, I should say. I think because it's an easy return on investment, the lighting stuff should be something we put in there. Because
Okay.
it should be pretty easy to get our money back from that. Then look at, so we got HVAC, we got the lighting, windows, because, you know, as somebody had said, putting a nice heater, air conditioning in here is, you know, might be even nicer out on the lawn because it escapes so fast. So what is the price tag of all that stuff, sort of the conditions? And if it's 40 million, then what can we do for the 40 million that makes sense overall to our district? And then look at, okay, the next one is Proposition 2 is continued energy reduction. Maybe we throw in the heat pump, geothermal. And we do the classrooms and the science classes or whatever. And then Proposition 3, we say. And then a dog can see what I'm doing. I mean, it's the thing that we have to keep in mind, it's gonna be it's gonna be a risk. We're gonna put this out to the taxpayers. Hopefully, we can put out not just say, hey, we want 50 million, but we want 50 million because we want to eliminate oil, we want to reduce our energy by 50%, we want to get rid of the mold problems once and for all. We want to keep these rooms cool in the summer and warm in the winter without, the swings that we have today. We want to save as much as we can by, replacing these 60-year-old windows.
So would it be safe to move forward with updated cost estimates based on what you're saying, Perry? With the DOAS construct, we'll just go with like DOAS plus envelope EPC. We'll front load that into the Prop 1 where it doesn't make sense to do this piece without that piece. So we'll give you all of those. These make sense to do together pieces in that Prop 1, focusing on indoor air quality, HVAC upgrades. We'll use the DOAS numbers as a baseline if we're comfortable with that, because I feel like I think geothermal is the bigger financial reach and the other in kind is not ideal. So if we're kind of shooting for the middle in terms of money, if you let us work off the DOAS numbers, we'll tighten that up. We'll do roof, windows, all of the envelope pieces that go with that. We'll make sure that the EPC is fully addressed, especially with overlapping scope in terms of, like we said earlier, if we're going to rip the ceilings down to do lights, we'll do lights and ductwork in one shot. So we'll really use the project team meeting time to tighten that up. We'll do our program improvements as the proposed Prop 2, and then those non-health and safety emergency items, i.e. the site work and the vehicle infrastructure, would be Prop 3. So does that sound like a logical flow for our next discussion?
Well, hang on to that thought for a second. And the other thing is we need to really have some legitimate numbers, because we need to go, somebody suggested the firehouses. We need to go to the firehouses, get the public in there, explain why we're, right up front, we probably look like we're out of our minds. But this is why, this is what we want to accomplish in all three propositions. But that's, and the reason I said hang on, Elliot, is because what you heard was my opinion. The board, again, we can sit and try to whittle this down, but or try to make sense out of something. But at some point, we're gonna have to go to the public and say, this is what we're saying, this is what we're proposing and why. And that has to include real numbers in it. But the first thing we have to do, I mean, if the board feels like nothing over $8 million as a total capital budget will pass, then we put.
Well, the
some
only thing with
paper.
the only thing with the DOAS system is the budget's, it's gonna go up another, give or take, $10 to $13 million. And we're still gonna have steam. That's my only concern. I want that system. It's just, I don't. We'd have to decide on what we're taking out, in my opinion, to make that system work.
And Chris, to your point, we can tighten all that up. I mean, we can look to if we're like, again, if we're focusing on DOAS, I'm looking at components in columns 2 and 3 that are gonna have to come together for this to work in a way that makes us all comfortable and makes sense. So let's get rid of the steam. Let's go with the boiler, and that's got to dovetail with the EPC, right? So we got to work with Matt and Lauren to make sure that the scope matches up and makes sense. So
But
that's
with the
why.
DOAS, it doesn't get rid of the steam with the DOAS.
Well, it can, we just have to update the numbers, right? We have to look at, and the size of the boiler, perhaps Matt or Lauren can jump in on this, but if we're going with a full DOAS system, it affects the size and the configuration of the proposed boiler replacements, right? Because we're not using it as a primary source of heat, we're using it as a backup source of heat. Is that right, Matt?
Yes.
Thank you. So
Yeah.
again, thank you, Matt, Lauren, whichever. But Chris, like to your point, right? So we're trying to give you as much information as possible, but sometimes it's a little confusing or conflicting because everything's broken out into options. So if we
No,
can
I
just,
understand. And that's why I'm trying to stick, but if we said, okay, we're gonna get rid of the steam, we're gonna go to DOAS, then it's gonna be an additional cost to switch that over on top of what the DOAS
But then it
option is.
could reduce the size of the boilers that they're gonna put in there anyway.
That's
But
right.
they need it as much, so they put in smaller boilers and maybe even not put a backup boiler. I mean, if they're brand new, why do we need a backup?
or to use a different heating source.
Increase it though,
Worse, we go back to.
right? Because I mean, we're still bringing in new technology versus the old.
Well, we've also, and again, I'm not trying to further complicate this, but we've also talked about alternate fuel sources. So I'm just going to say as an example, we could look at a liquid propane backup boiler in lieu of an oil burner if it's the backup boiler and it's not needing to make as many BTUs as our primary heat source. So like, these are the kind of things that if we're just moving in this conceptual direction, we can drill it down a little bit further so that we can look at the overall budget in a clearer way.
I will believe me, I want nothing more than to get this, a little bit, slim down, cleaner, and we're all on the same page.
So. I'll give you my take. We ought to go after, I don't think we can get the GI, although I would absolutely love to have Millbrook on geothermal. We'll never get that passed, even if it paid for itself, we'd never get that passed. To me, the DOAS system across the board is the way, at least until we see, here's a crisp set of numbers. We pulled this thing out, we put that thing back in. Here's the prop one. And, and to me, including, there's no sense of putting heat and air conditioning if you don't have good windows and doors. Do the lighting because it's a, easy win. And then get that size up. If that comes out where it's completely, the board just it can't accept that number, then we'll have to back off from there. But I feel like we keep these, by putting them in these options, and then we're sort of looking at the HVAC, but we're thinking about the windows and we're thinking about the lights, and it's too hard to get a set of numbers in our head.
Okay, so what I can do is we can get a meeting on the books for next week where we can circle back as a project team and review a full DOAS conversion, Elm, Alden, and middle school.
Hang on, man. You did, that was my thought.
Okay.
I'd like that board do theirs. And then, hopefully we can come to an agreement or a direction that we want them to redo. Or do.
So I'm okay with that. I think almost as a separate conversation, maybe just the board, Elliot, Caroline, like, here's what each dollar figure is gonna cost the taxpayers. And start settling in on a top number, even before we have these back. So we know later on. We added to DOAS, we know we gotta cut whatever.
Yeah, I mean,
I think that's, I mean, all the things is how we're gonna sell this in the end, but ultimately the number is really gonna be the biggest key. And if we overshoot that, we're gonna be out of luck.
so if we tell them to go basically TOAS for the HVAC as optimal cost-wise as possible. Include windows and doors or whatever, windows and whatever. And lighting for proposition one, come back to us with. Here's the option that we were talking about. Here's the price, here's the cost of it. You know, and here's, we sort of had. The like the monthly impact of it. But we don't have the number to kind of put it in that category yet.
I think an important number too, and I agree with you on that, is just the total.
Yeah.
So yes, I mean, they can front load all the important stuff and give us that number, but I think it's also important to know the total. Because that comes in at 72 million and we want 55 million, we know we have to cut 17 million off of the spreadsheet somewhere.
And this is a timely conversation because we are buttoning up our fund balance from 22-23. So I can give the board a projection of how much or how close to fully funded our cap reserve can look. That's $10 million potentially right there. We already know we can borrow 19, close to 19 as a cost neutral with our debt coming off the books in 2027 and beyond. So that, you know, right now we're walking into this conversation at, you know, roughly $29 million of tax neutral money. So I'd like, I'm sorry?
Plus the EPC.
Plus the EPC.
Plus the EPC, correct. So that's what I was going to say. So I'd like to come back to the board, like Perry said, with all the things that make sense to tie together, the full EPC with all the HVAC, using the DOAS design as the baseline of conversation and all the logical things that go with that. Let's front load that into the prop one. And then all of our program desires, we'll put into prop two just for ease of clarity of message. And then all the non-emergency, non-instructional, I'll say infrastructure and site work items that pertain to traffic and movement of vehicles and people. We'll put that in the back into the prop three, again, just for clarity of message and discussion purposes, and we can certainly move things around thereafter. But I don't know that this is going to be as daunting once we have the fund balance conversation as well.
Yeah, I don't want prop three with the vehicle traffic until the board has a discussion on whether to do a full-blown traffic and safety study.
So we can have that
Before-
conversation too, Mr. Shapiro. We have a proposal from BBS on that I can share with you folks as well.
Okay, that's fine.
Chris,
I'm good with Elliot's plan.
David? Okay, Chris?
Yeah.
All right, go away.
Thank you, sir.
Go away and do that.
Appreciate the project team for showing up tonight and providing all of this additional information. And thank you to the board for being so candid with us and giving us some direction.
Thank you.
I'm just gonna-
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thanks,
guys.
everyone. Have a good night.
Have a good one.
All right, why don't we take 5 minutes? If anybody's got a,